Okay, welcome to Airsoft Central, our new shop. I'm going to give you a heads up guide on how to strip down a version 2 gearbox, which everyone seems to be terrified of. Okay, before you guys start, you're going to need the right tools. Having the right tools makes all the difference. So you need to get yourself a good set of Allen keys, metric and imperial. A lot of the Chinese at the moment still are using imperial Allen keys. So if you don't have imperial Allen keys, you're really going to struggle getting some of these Allen screws out. So a good set of Allen keys. Get yourself a nice little toolkit of long nose pliers, cutters, mix of screwdrivers, Phillips and flats. Small tapping hammer, very, very useful tool. Don't need a big one, a small one. And get yourself an assortment of just a couple of Phillipses. These are called Torx drivers. A lot of the screws aren't Allen screws, they are actually Torx screws. So you need to get yourself a small range of Torx drivers. And you can buy them as little combination sets. Very, very cheap, all as warehouse, 30 bucks, 35 bucks, that kind of thing. Other thing you're going to need, very, very handy, press stick. Also I found to do this kind of stuff and work on a chopping board. So go buy yourself a chopping board, don't use your wide chopping board, otherwise you'll be in the cack. Like this. Get some of these little bins, because as you start stripping your rifle down, put small screws, springs and stuff in, keep it all together, because you know what it's like, things go missing. So plan yourself a little workspace properly, you need good light. If you don't have good eyes like me, you need glasses. And have your tools all nice and handy, have everything together so you're not having to go and hunt and find things. As you do your rifle more and more, or rifles more and more, you'll realise the sort of small tools and the little specialised tools that you're going to need to strip down your own particular rifle. Right, to business with the gearbox. Okay, so this is a G&G version 2 gearbox out of my MP5. It comes with electric blowback, so all I've done is removed a little circlip here to remove the top slide housing. So what I need to do now is I need to get this section here removed. Basically all just slides backwards, so there's nothing major there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this, it's called a drift tool, and just very, very carefully balance it on, just there, and then with the hammer you're just going to tap it back. See, it's already moving back, and you'll get to a point where it will just slide off. So you might have to repeat this a couple of times. And then you can just pull that back. Same with the actual blowback mechanism here as well. So I'm just going to tap this one back here exactly the same way. Okay, so that slides back. Just remove this little piston section, just comes away. Now on gearboxes that don't have the electric blowback facility, what you'll find is there'll just be a bunch of screws here, 4 or 6 screws, and you just remove them, so you won't have this mechanism. If you do have it, you know how to remove it now. Okay, so press stick. Make sure your press stick becomes nice and elastic. And what we're actually going to do, and this little trick was told to me by old Alex, slide back. It becomes a lot easier to manipulate the stuff if your gearbox doesn't slide around everywhere. So just by using a bit of press stick, you can actually hold everything quite nicely in place as you're working. And this is where a lot of guys have a lot of problems, because you're trying to manipulate screws, springs, and if everything's moving around and wobbling, it just becomes 10 times harder. So with a chopping board and a press stick, you'll see this just keeps the bottom portion of the gearbox nicely in place. Okay, there we go. So now the gearbox is nice and fixed. It's nice to actually be able to put the wires down as well, because as you start to reassemble, these wires will actually start to move out, and you end up trapping the wires on the inside housing part. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start loosening all the gearbox screws around the housing. Now what you want to do is, if you're doing planned maintenance, before you actually open your gearbox up, you want to put your rifle to semi and fire off a couple of rounds, because what happens then is the spring is in its most relaxed position, i.e. the piston's fully forward. Quite often when you fire a burst in full auto, the spring will be compressed at the back of the chamber, and obviously a more compressed spring when you open this thing up, the more likely it is to go shooting across the room. So I've removed all of the screws now here, and you can see the gearbox is under tension, so it's not going to go popping out. So now we have to relax it. At the back here is where your main spring housing is with your piston. Now what you can do is get a screwdriver. Again, I'm going to use this drifting tool, and that is actually going to hold this in place as I lever open the gearbox itself. So grabbing a small screwdriver, just keeping some tension on the housing, what you can do is very, very gently start to part it open. And all we're going to do is just ease it open. Keep a thumb on the piston cylinder there, and keep your hand just keeping the spring into its place. And what you can do now is just literally get the whole top section off. With a relative amount of ease. So you can see here this piston is fully forward, and I've actually got control of the spring now using the drift tool. So all I'm going to do now is bring up the spring guide, ease the spring back, and there you go. The only other part now that's under tension is the tappet plate, which is this piece of mechanism here, and you can see it's under tension with this spring. So very carefully, again, just keep your finger over the spring. You can actually just lever it up the post, and there you go. No springs flying across the room because they become hard to find. So there we go. So now the tappet plate is nice and loose. Okay, so now our tappet plate's out. I can now actually remove the whole piston mechanism quite easily. And the only other spring left now that you need to watch for is on your trigger pull return. So what I'm going to do now is literally pull the whole piston mechanism out. There we go. You can see everything's nice and relaxed. Okay, now here's your gearing system. Sometimes your bearings will come out of the housing. Don't overly stress about it. They're very, very easy to push in. The other thing you need to maintain as well is make sure you keep all your little washers for your bushings on your gears. There we go. There's the anti-reversal latch, which causes a lot of problems, and again, the little spring mechanism. You just keep all these parts together nice and handy. Okay. So there you go. So there your gearbox is completely stripped down now. Now what I tend to use is Teflon grease. There's a nice thin coating of grease on all the gear wheels. You don't want to over grease it, because then it just attracts more and more dirt. So you can see here there's a nice light coating on all these gears. And again, now where my piston slides back, I use a little bit of silicone grease just to help the piston's friction mechanism. Okay, I upgraded the piston on this because this is one of your main failure parts. If you're using the original plastic piston housing, I definitely recommend you go for one that is steel toothed. Some of the guys say they don't like the steel tooth in case the steel tooth fails, but I've never seen a steel tooth piston fail. I have seen plastic ones fail. Even in my old KWA, the plastic teeth failed and it just fouled the whole gearbox up. Replace the piston head with a nice, good quality piston head with the Teflon O-ring seals. The Teflon seals last longer than the normal rubber ones, so again, it's a nice investment for reliability. This trigger box I replaced. I was having problems with the original trigger box, so I replaced this one with a GMP trigger box, and this works quite nicely. The only snag I have occasionally is it catches because it's not designed for this. I need to clean it up and redo it. It's one of the reasons why I'm opening this. And this mechanism here is part of your auto fire select. So if you're getting auto run problems, your problem is normally coming from this area and your auto selector plate which sits on the other side of the gear housing. Okay, so to reassemble the pistons in, I've put a very, very small light coating of grease on the gearing here, you can see, but it's very, very thin. And obviously as everything moves, it'll coat itself as it goes around. Remember about the washers, make sure your washers are all in place as they should be. Now it's just a case of taking your time, make sure everything fits nicely. And if you feel you're getting a bit flustered, the best thing to do is just get up and walk away for a couple of minutes and come back to that. You can see it's a little bit fiddly, but yeah, everything just does eventually just drops out. There we go. Okay. Right. You can see there where the first tooth will catch the piston head. So just for ease, when you're putting everything back in, just have it slightly rotated down, because when you put the tapping plate back in the spring, you don't want it under tension as it catches here on the gear. And as you're going along, check your parts. You don't see any damage on the tip of the nozzle, otherwise you'll start getting misfires. All that kind of stuff. So, and back over. There we go. Right. And everything should just move nice and easy. There should be no hiccups at this stage. Just check your clearances, make sure everything lines up. The way these guys work when they build these things, they try and make them sort of like user friendly for manufacturing. So if something doesn't feel right, I can guarantee you it isn't right. So everything should just move nice and easy. Nothing should be stuck. If something's stuck, then you've done something wrong. Just step back and go back and relook at it. So again, I'm going to hook the tappet plate spring back in. There we go. Okay. Okay, so you'll see she's under a bit of tension now, but if you get the gearing in the right place, then you minimise the amount of pressure you put on your gears when you start to put everything back into place. Okay, last thing. Reversal latch in place, drop your gear in, and there we go. You find when you close this case now, this anti-reversal latch is almost guaranteed to move. So don't force it. Again, when it closes, it should just close quite nicely and it'll just click together. And if something's wrong, take your time, reopen, and just check that everything's nicely lined up. I've just greased this now a little bit earlier. So that's ready to go back on. That bearing that fell out, I just clipped it back in. Now the fun part begins. Okay. Using the drift. This is where a second pair of hands quite often comes in quite handy. But you can do it on your own. Okay, the spring guide's got little cut-out holes here. So carefully push it back in. Get the spring guide in place, and then she drops in. Now you're going to have to maintain some pressure. Okay, by using the drift now you can see I can actually hold quite a bit in place. You can get a longer and thinner screwdriver, get all the way through. You can actually trap the spring, it's too thick, all the way down, but you can just keep the tension off it, like so. Keeping your finger on. Everything's in place now, so nothing's going to budge. So the trick now is to transfer, keep pressure on for the top plate. And then you can start getting everything lined up. I'm actually starting to fit it. Clip in. See, the front section's gone in nicely. Now remember I said about the anti-reversal latch, so I get a thin screwdriver, Phillips. You can see my wires have stayed in place thanks to the press stick. Okay, my anti-reversal latch is now in place. Everything is closed up. Nothing feels tight. Everything feels like it's gone back in properly. You can check your gearing, make sure your gears are synced properly. You can see the top of the anti-reversal latch there. And then you can start putting your gearbox screws back into place. And as soon as you've got a couple of screws in, you can relax a bit, because now everything will just basically hold. Okay, before I do everything back, what I like to do is I just want to make sure that my tappet plate moves freely, because if that doesn't move then you've got something jammed in, and my trigger should operate nice and clean, no jamming, which tells you that everything is back to where it should be, so you're not catching on any of the wires, and you can continue to close it up. Okay, there you go, take the drift down to the back. Check your selector plate, that moves nice and free, and there you go. So after you've done this 3 or 4 times, you'll be stripping a gearbox down in 20 minutes, reassembling, cleaning, finding your problems. And like I say, half of your problems you'll find when you're putting back together. If something doesn't go nice and fit properly, if you're having to force something and something's not right, reopen it, recheck it, and make sure everything lines up. There you go. How to strip a version 2 gearbox down, clean it, and rebuild it. Have fun.